I am the communications director for Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. What we focus on is preventing abuse in Christian ministries. Up here you see a picture of my beautiful family on the bottom. My two daughters, Gabriella and Isabella, right here. They're twin 12-year-olds. I almost said 11. They had a birthday a couple weeks ago. My husband, ex-military veteran, served several tours during 9/11. You'll see some pictures of me in my past. The first picture is my cousins, myself, and my grandfather on a Christmas morning. Everybody you see in that picture with a heart on their face has been abused, sexually abused. My best friend and I growing up went to many concerts together. That one was from an Alicia Keys concert. She was also abused. My nephew, horrific situation from a gentleman in his church, horribly abused. My oldest daughter, she was 15 at the time at a Christian homeschool co-op where she was sexually assaulted by a peer. Myself, I was groomed by my cousin at the ripe age of 12 until I was about 15. And when I told my mother about it, she said, well, honey, it's probably your fault because of the way you dress. So had I had biblical instruction, a godly example, I can guarantee you that would not have been the life I would have chosen for myself. So I show you this heartbreaking slide because it shows the prevalence of abuse in our society. Of course, we all know what Scripture says. In the beginning, there was no sin, therefore there was no sexual abuse. It wasn't until Satan deceived us that we started looking at each other a little bit differently, right? So that was not the original intention of God's plan, was for children to be preyed upon. But before we get started, and I teach you what grooming looks like, which is the majority of how abuse cases start, we need to define what abuse is. According to mandatedreporter.com, child abuse is any act or failure to act resulting in imminent risk, serious injury, death, physical or emotional or sexual harm, or exploitation of a child. There's 5 different types of abuse. Some of these are not well known. The one that's probably most not well known is spiritual abuse. This happens because of an abuse of authority in the church. We all know that God entrusted parents and caregivers of children to take care of them. We all know abuse is wrong, but why is it so prevalent in our society? The statistics, unfortunately, are alarming. And even if the statistics are anywhere near accurate, and there's reason to believe that they're grossly inaccurate, then at any church activity, you could have dozens of abuse survivors present. So the question is, how are we ministering to them? Is this a taboo topic of conversation that is just swept under the rug and not talked about? Because I can guarantee you that the majority of people are uncomfortable talking about this subject, but it's vitally important for our children that we are talking about this subject. Because 1 in every 3 girls, by the time they are 18, will be sexually abused. 1 in every 4 boys, by the time they're 18, will be sexually abused. 92% of all abuse happens from people we know. It is not stranger danger. That is a huge misnomer. Yes, strangers can be dangerous, but us teaching our children stranger danger, what if we lose them at a zoo, at a park, and there's a ton of people? They can't find their parents. How are they going to know who's trusted in the community to go up and ask for help? So stranger danger, I would encourage you, don't teach that to your kids. Teach them who they can identify as a trusted person in the midst of chaos. That's what you need to be talking about. 80% of child abuse cases are not reported until they're adults. Why? When kids are groomed at young ages, they think that this is normal behavior. It's not until they become adults that they realize that this is wrong to the core. So it's important that we're talking about it, because if something happens to these children, they should be comfortable to come to a trusted individual to say, hey, mom, hey, youth pastor, this is going on, and I don't know what to do about it, right? What's alarming is the statistics with churches. There's not a lot out there. There hasn't been an immense amount of studies, but what we do know was produced by Lifeway and the National Sexual Offender Public website. What we know is 12% of Protestant women have left a church because of sexual misconduct. 12% of less than 25-year-old Protestant women have left a church because of misconduct. That is unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable. But there's been a huge increase in child exploitation since 2020. Who can tell me what happened in 2020 that could cause this? Anybody by a show of hands? Just shout it out. COVID, right? What happened with COVID that caused a much higher amount of child exploitation than any other year?
They were in the house.
They were in the house. What were they on?
Internet.
The internet. Their electronics, right? They weren't just on electronics like an hour a day, all day. They were on electronics all day. And so since COVID, statistics have skyrocketed. Online enticement, which might be a foreign phrase to some people, it involves an individual communicating with someone who's believed to be a child via the internet with the intent to commit a sexual crime against the child. So a broad category of online exploitation includes sextortion, where a child is being groomed to take sexually explicit photos or videos and send it to their groomer online. A lot of times these groomers will pretend like they're children. We've even seen it in an innocent game called Roblox, where these people are pretending to be kids. They're talking to other kids, and then they ask them to leave Roblox and go to a Discord server. Discord is a little confusing, but it's made up of a ton of different servers that you can join, and it's like chat rooms, but it's audio. So people can talk to each other, and you can send each other files and all these different materials. And we're going to get into how electronic service providers are mandated by law to report child exploitation images. And some of the sites are absolutely alarming on how many cases have been reported. We're going to get into that. So about a 97.5% increase from 2019 to 2020 in just individual child exploitation crimes being reported. This is not including electronic service providers. This is just concerned parents or children reporting on the cyber tip line, which the information is right here for you to jot down. If you think anybody is being exploited online, that's the resource for you to use. So the electronic service providers that have the highest number of reports to the cyber hotline starts with Facebook at about 21.5 million reports. Instagram is next with about 5 million, then Google, WhatsApp. Does anybody know what Omegle is? No. It's an app available on the App Store, free for all. Their phrase is, let's talk to strangers. So it's like a carousel where you have pictures of people up, and you can join them or swipe to the next one. You don't know what's coming on that screen. Kids are using this app, and there are very explicit things going on this app. Thankfully, my daughters had no clue what it was. They're little sheltered homeschoolers. But the majority of kids that are not in homeschool know exactly what this app is and is using it. They're being exposed to pornography, unfortunately. Behind Omegle, Snapchat, that's more or less to be expected. TikTok. There's some controversy with TikTok, as I'm sure you all are aware. China has been using TikTok to steal our data, but they've also been using TikTok to groom children. They're grooming children to think that their gender is fluid. But they're banning the same exact material in China. So it's very questionable, right? Leading behind TikTok is Discord, which we talked about. Microsoft Online. You're going to see a lot of these like Amazon photos. So these are people uploading their photos into the cloud that have explicit images on them. So just another statistic that I did not have up there was 1 in 5 children will be sexually exploited online before they're 18 years old. This particular slide here comes from the cyber tip line rather. Of all of those individual reports and electronic service provider reports that I mentioned to you, 49,000 of them were reported to the law enforcement in their area for involving a child in imminent danger. So these children were at risk of serious danger. 99.5% of reports received contained child sexual abuse material. So one thing I wanted to mention is when I say children, that includes teenagers. So anybody less than 18. So child sexual abuse materials. The challenge is all cases should have to be reported to the law enforcement, but only 49,000 of them that we went over millions of cases, right? Only 49,000 of them were reported. I think all of them should have been reported, but that's just my opinion. All of this is sexual abuse on children, and so why only 49,000 out of the millions that they uncovered were reported? I don't have answers for that, unfortunately. But out of all the material that they discovered from these millions of cases just in 2022 alone, 88.3 million files were found. 49.4 million were images of children being horrible things being done to them. 37.7 million were video files, and then 1.2 million were miscellaneous. Audio files, maybe? I'm not sure. But why, right? Why does our culture have such a fascination with the child exploitation? I have a few ideas. I think we could all speak to everything on here, but let's go one by one. Children have access to the internet like never before. They can look up pornography on their phone at any time if parents are not diligent. Also, adults, if we have congregants, if we have pastors that are entertaining themselves with pornography, I can guarantee you that they're coming across child pornography. Those images are then embedded in their mind. If it's not dealt with, sin turns to death, right? It has to be dealt with, and that means pastors have to do a better job at equipping their congregants and talking about the hard things. What's most alarming is America is the #1 producer and the #1 consumer in child pornography. We're also the #1 human trafficking country in the world. This is alarming. A lot of us were not aware of this, right? A lot of us didn't know that human trafficking was so prevalent until recently. Sound of Freedom came out, which was demonized by the media. But the same media that persecuted Jim Caviezel and the band for making Sound of Freedom was the same media that applauded and praised Cuties, which was child pornography on Netflix. So we have a culture issue. We are called to be the light of this world. My challenge to all of you, are we fulfilling Titus 2:12? Are we turning our backs to worldliness and the passions of our flesh? And are we renouncing wickedness in this present time? Too many of us are quiet. Too many of us are going to people we're comfortable with to talk about these things, but we need to talk about it with everybody that will give us an ear, because we have a responsibility to the kids. So then we also see fashion industries that are targeting children. Balenciaga, along with Disney, decided to put out bondage videos and pictures of kids advertising their fashion line. So these kids are holding teddy bears with bondage all over them. And of course, Christians had a backlash about it. We didn't like it. We were very outspoken, some of us, and again, persecuted for it. But if they persecuted Christ, we will suffer with him, right? We have to talk out about this stuff. What else? So child beauty pageants have been the rage over the last decade. Toddlers and Tiara, I think, was the TV show. You had so many celebrities coming out and saying how sexy these children were. They're babies. They're babies that are dressed up to look like grown women, and we wonder why child pornography is so rampant in America. Then we have things like TikTok. I mentioned to you about TikTok, gender dysphoria and confusion. Hollywood is constantly trying to get our children to give in to the LGBTQ agenda. Then we see music videos that these women are half naked in, and we wonder why our teenagers are dressing the way they are and giving themselves over to certain things, right? Then we have dolls that are coming out, LOL dolls. Have you heard about these? They were the latest thing a couple years ago. My daughters even like them, and on the surface, they're like super cute, right? All these different fashion designs and stuff. But when they color change, all of a sudden, these babies have lingerie on. What? Babies with lingerie? This is ridiculous. So, we know our culture has a problem, but so does the church, unfortunately. Church shepherds are called to pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock, because you're overseers, right? And if anyone causes one of these little ones to stumble, the consequences are great. So are we warning? Are we talking about it? Unfortunately, the top 5 reasons that churches end up in court from 2014 to 2018, almost every single year, the top 2 reasons had something to do with sexual abuse. We mentioned how about 12% of church members, or actually I didn't mention this, 12% of church members know someone in the church who has been sexually abused. How are we helping them? How are we helping the victims of this heinous crime? How are you ministering to children and sexual abuse survivors? There was a gentleman, his name was Mr. Rain, we'll just call him Mr. Rain. He grew up in the church from very young. He started looking at things he shouldn't online, and he kept continuing to serve in the church without telling anybody about his entertainment habits. He served in children's church, he served in VBS, and he molested several children along his way. He was a teenager. And when the children raised any kind of questions about it, they were like, well, he's a good kid, right? He's a VBS helper, he's a this helper, he's a that helper. On the surface, he looked like a great kid, but his heart was wicked. And nobody was shepherding his heart in light of what his extracurriculars were, because nobody knew about them. How many Mr. Rains do we possibly have in our midst? Because it starts young. We know that there's a very high calling to the stewardship of children. We see this in Genesis 1, 26 through 28, that says that we are commanded to be fruitful and multiply. The privilege of stewardship as a gift of children in James 1:27 and Psalm 127:3. accountability for shepherding them in 1 Timothy 3:4-5. Jesus gave children great value when they didn't have it before he came here on earth. Right? That's in Mark 10:13-16. We have a great responsibility to teach these children and to protect them. We see that in Deuteronomy and Isaiah and Jeremiah. Defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless. So are we doing that again? So there's a lot of assumptions that we make about the church and about the people that go to the church. Another quick story for you about one of the false assumptions that we make, and this particular assumption is it will never happen to us. So many of our teenage girls are babysitters. Pretty safe assumption to make, right? They're responsible or they're not, and if they are responsible, they get to babysit some of the kids in the church. Well, what if, and this has happened many a times, what if the babysitter brings a boyfriend over when the parents aren't home, right? That's not uncommon. And what if the boyfriend starts to touch the little kid that the babysitter is responsible for? Also, not uncommon. The girls walked in on the boy doing this and said, "What are you doing? Stop." Well, if you tell anybody, I'm gonna this, and this. Right? This is common. This is not uncommon. This is happening more often than we think. And so the assumption that it will never happen to us, I didn't think it would happen to me. I was groomed as a kid. I educated my children. But my daughter was at a co-op, and a boy walked up behind her and groped her. And so, yes, it can happen. But how are we educating our kids, and how are we being diligent in the midst of all that to see what's going on? Another assumption that we're making is sexual predators are monsters, and they're nothing like us. That is simply not true. Sexual predators, they do not fit a profile at all. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. Too often we talk about wolves in sheep's clothing being false teachers. They're not just false teachers. They're also predators who are after our children. Another false assumption we make is we know the people in our church. But do we? Many churches are way too quick to put volunteers who are eager to serve kids in contact with children to serve. And we're going to get into that a little bit more here in a minute. I would just like to say, though, where there are Christians, there are sinners. Where there are sinners, there are hypocrites. It's very easy to live two different lives when you only see a group of people 2 days a week, or maybe 1 day a week. Another assumption that we make is our church is safe for our kids. And yes, I think relatively, yes, you want to believe that. But our churches are desperate for volunteers most of the time. And when you're desperate for something, it's easy to let things slip through the cracks. So the question is, are we compromising the safety of the children for programs being staffed by volunteers? Because that's a dangerous place to be. Now, one thing I'd like to add is I mentioned my nephew was molested. So we moved down from Pennsylvania to Florida about 14 years ago. We left there because we needed a really good Bible teaching church. We couldn't find one up there where we were located. And so we prayed and prayed and prayed, and the Lord, in his providence, moved us down to Florida, and we go to a great Bible teaching church. But when we were in Pennsylvania at a church that wasn't a Bible teaching church, we went there with my nephew and his mother and his new stepdad. And he was so eager and so sweet to serve my oldest daughter. He's a couple years older than her. And he would take her with to children's church and all this. What we didn't know, and we just found out a few years ago, is his stepdad, who was a children's minister and highly looked up to in the church, was sexually abusing him for 10 years. 10 years without detection. When his mom decided to divorce his dad, he was thrilled. This was his stepdad that they got divorced from. And for some reason, she wanted to get back with him after a couple years. And he begged her not to. And that's when she found out what he had done. Thankfully, he saved evidence. A 16-year-old kid saved evidence. and that man is thankfully locked away right now, but this is happening far too often. So, two different types of sexual predators. The first one's called the persuasion predator. The persuasion predator uses what's called the lover boy method at times. Have anybody heard of that? Andrew Tate's in the news right now for using that method to groom a massive amount of young girls to make TikTok videos for him and get money. So he took all that money from them. So basically what the persuasion predator does is they use their charm, their likability, and their influence to gain trust. These people are very charismatic. These people are professionals. I'm going to list a couple different professions. You tell me which one is most likely to be a predator, okay? Young single male architects, soccer mom of 4, pediatrician, priest, public school teacher, college professor, athletic director. Which one's most likely? All of them. Every single one. Because we all have it in our heart, right? We all have sin in our heart. It's just whether or not we're dealing with it. The power predator takes by force. So these are your kidnappings. These are human trafficking a lot of times. It's taken by force. I mentioned before the myth of stranger danger, because 93% of survivors know who their abuser is. I think it was about, I forget the statistic, but it's more than 50% that's a family member, and then the rest are acquaintances. So about 43%? The problem is that kids don't know what to do when a safe, trusted adult makes them feel uncomfortable. And so I'm going to talk about a few resources, but this particular resource here, has anybody seen this book before? Safeguards by Julie Lowe? I know you have. You've met Julie Lowe.
Yes, I did.
So she wrote this book to equip parents on how to talk to their kids about sexual predators, abuse, internet, safety, things like that. I highly recommend you guys get this book in your library so your parents can be equipped.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the title again?
Safeguards, Shielding Our Homes and Equipping Our Kids by Julie Lowe. Excellent, excellent book. So I mentioned to you about kids in public. What happens if a kid gets lost at a zoo or a park, right? Do you know what the best practice is if that happens?
Try to find a worker.
Try to find a worker. What should the parent do? You know what the parent should do? Act like a crazy person. Act like, cause a scene. I'm looking for a 12-year-old wearing a maroon jacket, curly hair, this tall, white girl, whatever. Name her description. You know what you're doing? You're having everybody in the perimeter that's a responsible human being look for your child. It's not just one person. And if a predator took your child, because you're causing a scene, the chances are they're going to let go of that child. Cause a scene. This has saved countless lives. Okay. How do predators groom children in your midst? Different techniques by sexual predators to groom children in the church community. The first thing they do is they groom the entire church community, which sounds exhausting, but it's really not that difficult. They come in looking like a trusted person. They're all buttoned up and cleaned up. They don't look like a monster by any means. They're literally cultivating a double life. They look trusted. They fill in a need. Usually churches need children's workers, youth workers, so they will church hop until they find that need. They will church hop until they find a church that doesn't do a background check, that doesn't require membership, that doesn't look up references. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for an easy target. And there's a church on every block in this country. They will find one. I promise you that. Once they gain that trust with several church members, it's harder for suspicions to actually be taken in or to be taken seriously if somebody accuses that person of anything. COVID proved also that our culture lacks critical thinking. Only 12% of our country possesses critical amount of praise. Then they are going to start to try to gain access to the child outside of church. So, for example, Mr. Smith runs a Sunday school class, and he says, well, these kids didn't memorize their verse, these kids didn't do their homework, so I'm going to see if they can stay a little extra after Sunday school class. Parents say, okay, sure, we trust you, Mr. Smith, right? What does Mr. Smith do? Okay. He starts gradually, very gradually, touching the children, but very innocently. Start on the back, over the clothes. Okay, the child didn't say anything. Then slowly go under the shirt on the back. If the child says anything, he has an excuse. I was just looking for chicken pox, no big deal. Oh, he was saying his back hurt. I was just checking for a cut, right? Okay, so now he's not going to focus on that child anymore because the child told his parents, this guy made me uncomfortable. He's going to keep finding the child that doesn't say anything. So once he finds that child who doesn't say anything, now he has a hyper focus on that child and tries to gain access to the child in the home. Other innocent ways that this might occur over time, and it's a continuum. Tickling games, stroking of hair. There was a woman who kept touching my daughter's hair every time she was near her. And I'm like, my daughter told me, Mom, she's making me uncomfortable. So I went up to the woman and I said, hey, can you please stop touching my kid's hair? Like, you're making her uncomfortable. She's 4 years old. Like, stop. She's like, I don't know what the big deal is. If you're making someone uncomfortable, and you're not talking about their sin, right? Sin is uncomfortable. But if you're making somebody physically uncomfortable and you're crossing a line, you need to comfortably, you as a parent or as a pastor or as a youth leader, you have to address that. Because people cannot go without feeling a consequence of their sin. Right? That's called practicing self-control. I teach it to my kids, we can teach it to grown-ups, right? So those small, innocent behaviors slowly, gradually become more inappropriate over time, testing the child's response and blurring the lines between appropriate and inappropriate, gradually getting the child more comfortable with each step. So groomers are widely counting on no disclosure. Who remembers the Jerry Sandusky case? Great. Do you remember any details of it? Do you? A little bit? Penn State coach. Yep. Yeah. He was a foster parent. Everybody lauded this guy, right? I think he was a football coach. Is that right?
That's correct.
Well, several kids came forward, and nobody believed them. So it prevented other kids from coming forward because they kept saying, who would believe a kid? Because adults widely don't believe what children have to say. But I challenge everybody in this room, if a child says someone's making them uncomfortable, or if a child's behavior drastically starts changing, you have to dig deeper. These are red flags that we need to investigate. So they're counting on privacy. 55% will molest a child in front of other children covertly, and 24% will molest a child in front of an adult covertly. Our eyes are not open enough.
No.
Can you say those stats again? I'm sorry.
55% will molest in front of other children covertly. So that might be a teacher calling a child to his desk. The child's now standing behind the desk, nobody else can see, and the teacher touching inappropriately. And then the 24% was in front of another adult. There are 6 stages of grooming. The first one we talked a little bit about, finding a vulnerable target. And by the way, this happens in adults too. This is not just children that this happens in. And it's very important that we know this because when women get abused, more than likely they've been groomed. So it's important to know these steps so you can identify them. The second one is they gain trust. So they look like a phenomenal person up until they start isolating. because they're filling a need, they're a trustworthy person. A lot of people view likableness as trustworthiness. That is not the same. Then they fill a need. So a lot of times if it's a broken home, a broken family, a child just wants somebody to talk to. If it's a single mom, not many groceries, putting groceries in. These small acts of kindness that look great on the outside are very self-fulfilling for them because they're gaining trust, so they're furthering their agenda in the grooming cycle. Then they isolate. So that means for my nephew, that meant him, the stepdad, doing everything at night because the mom was at work. So isolation happens. Then they desensitize and sexualize. So they'll show materials. If they know that they've been abused in the past because the child has disclosed that, they'll even relive that abuse with a child to desensitize them again to it and then further the abuse. They might show them pornography. They might watch very provocative movies that will trigger something in the child because they've learned the child at that point. So that way they have a mental breakdown, they can take advantage. Then after that, it's all maintaining control. So they'll be nasty with their inappropriateness, but then they'll give gifts. And so it confuses the child. It confuses a woman, let alone a child. Targets of sexual predators. I love this picture. Why do I love this picture? Because if we're equipping parents, pastors, leaders, we can equip our kids, and they can see danger a mile away. And so can you. So sexual offenders target settings with lots of kids. Churches, Boy Scouts, Awana clubs, camps. Usually churches, mostly because they're most trusting. Camps, schools, they have a lot more procedures in place to keep predators out. And so you're not going to find predators trying to infiltrate schools as much as they do churches, like we talked about. If you see an adult or even a teenager who's trying to spend more time with children than people their own age, that's a red flag. According to convicted sex offenders, Victor Veith, who is an attorney, interviewed them, and he said that these sex offenders said that they target single, divorced parents, lacking a father figure. So if you're a dad and you're masculine, good job. There's no such thing as toxic masculinity. I'm just going to throw that out there. This country was based off of masculine men, and the men of the Bible were masculine. This is a lie from Satan. So the reason I bring this up is because sex offenders say if they see a dad who looks serious in public, maybe has a gun bag on him, maybe looks, like he doesn't want to be messed with, they're not going to target that guy's kids. They won't. If the mom is willing to look somebody dead in the eye that looks suspicious, which I will do all day, they're not going to target my kids. And there's been, I've traveled the country with my daughters by myself, and there's been situations that have happened where I've even had to keep somebody who's trying to break into my apartment out. And I'm not one to play around with. So, learn self-defense. Learn how to defend yourself. I think Christians are too often, I don't want to hurt somebody, right? I want to be forgiving. But we have to understand there's malicious people in this world. There's evil people that have given their heart over to Satan. And if God uses you as the tool for them to meet their maker, praise the Lord for that. Praise the Lord. I think I know my audience here. Sex offender John Henry was interviewed. He said, I showed those children affection and attention that they thought they needed but could get nowhere else. Almost without exception, every child I have molested was lonely and longing for attention. Their desire to be loved, their trust for adults, their normal sexual playfulness, and their inquisitive minds made them perfect victims. So, a very important lesson for Christians: children who are not craving an adult's attention are less likely to be targeted by predators. Another sex offender said, "There was a great amount of pride." Well, I pulled this one off again. You're a good one. There were times when little old ladies would pat me on the back and say, "You're one of the best young men I've ever known." I think back then and think to myself, if you really knew me, you wouldn't think that. So, the question is, which we've already touched base on a bit, why the church? Christians can be naive. Christians are ignorant of the abuse problem at hand. There's an abuse of authority. What I mean by the abuse of authority is children are taught to obey their elders and authority, no questions asked. I think questioning the rules for kids is called critical thinking.
Amen.
And they should be able to question the authority above them respectfully. They shouldn't be all sassy, right? But respectfully, they should be able to question authority. Attitudes of invincibility or grandiosity. So that's when some people are in a position of authority and they have an attitude that the normal rules of society just don't apply to them. And we find that often with prideful pastors, unfortunately. So there's an issue of real versus fake Christians. Real Christians understand Christ's sacrifice and have turned away from their sin. Not perfect, they know they'll fall, but they always go back to the cross. They're willing to be held accountable for their sin, and they share their heart. Fake Christians, they're ruled by their selfish desires for sex and power. They lie, cheat, manipulate, hurt others, leaving a trail of destruction in their path. So fakes, they go to church for easy access to children, and the real ones go to church because they need their Savior and they need each other to grow in the grace and knowledge of Christ. Manipulation of religious roles and languages. So religious roles give abusers a cover to abuse children and to be around children. Abusers will also use religious language to manipulate and confuse children. When children say, "Oh, this hurts." Well, no, this is love. God told me to do this. An 8-year-old is so confused at that point, right? So they manipulate children by using religious language. And then there's always cheap grace. Dietrich Bonhoeffer referred to it as cheap grace, grace that comes freely at very little cost. Once a predator is caught at a church, they give a wonderful sob story, ask for forgiveness, seem brokenhearted, and they're forgiven. And then it's swept under the rug 9 out of 10 times in the name of forgiveness. This has to stop. Absolutely has to. We all have to feel the full weight of our sin so we can appreciate our Savior. If we're not turning predators over to the authority to be dealt with, we are not only defending them, but we're inadvertently being groomed ourselves. And then, what are we doing to the survivors of these heinous acts, right? It's a dreadful situation, but we're not alone, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to talk a little faster here. So, 7 strategies. Oh, I forgot to relabel the last number, so don't look at that. 7 strategies for protecting against abuse in the church. The first one is creating and implementing a child protection program. So a child protection program is defined as a set of self-imposed guidelines that describes how a church intends to protect and care for the children that it's in care for. There's an old phrase that goes, fail to plan, plan to fail. That's right. So if you don't have a plan to protect the kids, the chances of you being able to protect them is very slim. The purpose of it is to create a safe environment. Your insurance company also has a purpose for your child protection program. It's not necessarily for a safe environment, though. It's to reduce and limit liability. So when you're creating your child protection program, I want you to think of 2 principles in that creation. The first one is the risk of abuse increases when a child is isolated with an adult. And the second one is the risk of abuse increases as accountability decreases. So if you can weave those two principles throughout your entire child protection program, the chances of your risk factors lowering are much higher. A few risk lowering factors: increasing the number of adults present in each room. By the way, it cannot be 2 family members. Why? Family members won't snitch on each other, will they? So if you're going to have a couple serving, have a third person. Hosting children's ministry activities on church property versus private homes. A lot of abuse is happening in small groups. And it's not just adult to children, it's peer-to-peer. Hosting at a time when people will be around, so you want a lot of people around, a lot of visibility. Organize clear physical boundaries that fence children in. This is primarily for like big events like VBS, where you need to make sure that people who are coming to pick up their kids are not able to interact with the kids. I'm a VBS director, and some people think I'm a little crazy because I have certain guidelines that I will not compromise to make sure that the people that are coming in from the community cannot interact with the children, because I don't know who they are. They don't have a background check on file. There's no references. We don't know their character, right? There's so many factors. Cultivate personal knowledge of the character and integrity of staff and volunteers. Staff and volunteers have to be screened and trained properly, including background check and references, before they're put in contact with children. Foster a high degree of openness about children's ministry classes and events, requiring approval of children's ministry activities by leadership before doing them. Create a proper understanding within the church of a proper culture of care for the kids. It's important that you equip your church members to be able to identify signs of abuse. And there's great resources. One of you mentioned Ministry Safe. They have great curriculum that you can use. There's many other curriculums that you can use as well. Protect My Ministry has a great program, Plan to Protect. We actually partner with some of these people, and I'll go into that at the end. But there are a lot of great resources out there if you feel like you're up against a wall and don't know what to do. Another strategy, and I would encourage you to try to incorporate all of these elements into your child protection program, but another one is a proper check-in and check-out process. 3 goals for that process. You need to make it very clear when the children are in control of when the church is in control of the children versus the parents. So at what point is that in a Sunday morning service or a Wednesday or whatever the day is you have church? Give volunteers an organized system that matches children with parents and vice versa, so there's never a chance that children can be returned to the wrong hands. And you want a system that will prevent, like I just mentioned, from children being turned over to the wrong person. How many of you require membership before they can start serving children?
Man.
Not a lot of us do. Not a lot of us do. So when we started going to our church, they were in desperate need for volunteers, and they quickly put us into that role. When I became a nursery coordinator there, I said, no, we are not doing that anymore. So church membership allows you to know the people before you put them in contact with children, and it acts as a firewall. So a predator will not try to infiltrate a high wall of a slow process, because it's going to be a lot longer process for them to gain access for children. They would rather the low wall, where they can serve right away and they don't have to jump through hoops and bounds to be able to get in contact with kids. So the question is, how well do we know them before we allow them to be with children, right? Membership helps with that process. Screening and verification. One thing we've learned, professionals have learned about offenders, people don't know how to tell when people are lying. All of us think we know how. We got these cues. We're like, oh, she looked this direction, or, her foot's starting to wobble, or whatever the case is, right? People don't know how to tell when someone's lying. And when you're talking about a groomer, they are mass manipulators. They've done this more than twice, right? So they have almost believed in the lie themselves, so it's very difficult for anybody to detect a lie from someone they barely know. So background checks are not the silver bullet, because on average 12 victims are victimized before someone's caught. And that's disheartening. A lot of people think, I'm just going to run a background check, we're good to go. No. At least 12 people have already been victimized before that person's caught. So you need a multifaceted approach. Training your staff and volunteers. You have to build a good training process. Everybody in your church needs to be trained. Entry-level training, some things to think about during that training: a vision for children's ministry, childhood evangelism, classroom expectations, policies and procedures, abuse and child neglect, what to look for, how to report it. A lot of people in church don't even know who to go to if an abuse situation happens, and they don't know who to report it to and what that process looks like. Every church should have a child safety team. And I would even encourage you to incorporate a victim ministry, a survivor ministry. Some different questions you would want to answer. What do I do if I suspect or observe a child has been abused? Who is the point of contact? What are my responsibilities with CPS? You want to also implement ongoing training. So refreshers on policies and procedures, emphasize the commonly disregarded policies and procedures that might be broken often, and why, emphasize why it's important to uphold those. Helping everyone think about how to teach the gospel to these children, and then of course give refreshers on abuse and neglect. I think one thing that I would encourage you to do is raise healthy skeptics. We don't want to be paranoid, but we want to be skeptical in a healthy way, because we know now of the situation of abuse. And if 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 4 boys are going to be sexually abused by the time they're 18, the chances of you having fake Christians in your midst are probably pretty high. And so I'm not saying that for you to be paranoid, but just be more vigilant. Okay, so preparing the church. And I have 5 minutes left before we go to Q&A. So bear with me, we're almost done. Okay, so the first thing we need in a church is humble leaders who care and plan. I'm going to read 2 quotes from you, not by my mouth by any means, so I don't want to offend anybody. The first one is by pastor and author Jared Wilson. A church should make humility a top requirement for leaders. Humility is observable. Look for it, and if it is hard to see in a leader, they should probably not be a leader. Everyone struggles with pride, of course, but leaders with surfacing problems of arrogance or aggression or self-centeredness will always struggle in discerning areas of power and vulnerability, which are very important to sort out in preventing abuse or handling its occurrences. You can't trust an unhumble person to sort through the fallout of abuse occurring under his watch. The second quote is by pastor and author Deepak Raju. Have anybody read this book? On Guard? I think everybody in this room who's a pastor or a ministry leader needs this book. It's called On Guard, Preventing and Responding to Child Abuse at Church. Deepak Raju said, arrogant, prideful, self-centered leaders are antithetical to genuine Christianity. They care more about building their own kingdom and protecting their own reputations than caring for the abused or punishing the abuser. Selfish leaders should never be tolerated in the pulpit. The second thing we need to prepare for the church in light of abuse is vigilant parents who understand. And this starts by teaching them. Classes and literature needs to be available, so I would recommend the Safeguards book by Julie Lowe in your library. There's also other books that are available through New Growth Press for children that talks about the value of their bodies and how to respect their bodies. So the goal is to help them understand, because the nature of child abuse is absolutely dreadful, and we want to help equip them to fight it. Internet safety for parents is going to be crucial, as well as for teenagers and children. Then you also want children and teenagers who are educated. Incorporate child safety into your teaching curriculum, what it means to stay close to home, who to talk to when they're lost. Remember that stranger danger misnomer? I did a little test with my twins when we were in New Orleans. What do you look for? What do you look for in a trusted person? Oh, we're going to look for a mom. We're going to look for someone who has a small child, someone who looks trustworthy. So it's important that you educate them on what type of stranger is trustworthy versus not. So we want to equip the kids, we want to equip the parents, we want humble leaders, then we also want to create a church culture that takes abuse seriously. Because if you're the only ones looking for the abuse, then you're doing yourself a disservice. You can have your entire congregation looking for the abuse in their midst. What does this do? When you start creating a conversation around this, survivors will come forward and thank you. People you don't know that have been abused will come forward and thank you for making this a topic of conversation, and you'll be able to serve them better that way. Okay, 4 reasons to ask for outside help. So, a lot of time churches are guilty for not responding to abuse correctly. Why? Because they feel like they can handle it internally by themselves instead, in the name of forgiveness and making whole the situation. So churches usually do not have people who are trained, though, to handle abuse. So I would encourage you, if you don't have a counselor on staff, they have wonderful virtual programs now since COVID. That's one great thing that came out of COVID. We do partner with Anchored Hope, who provides virtual counseling if you have survivors that need that. Number 2, any delay by the church in reporting abuse can result in the loss of important evidence that can be used against the abuser. 3, any delay to reporting child abuse to the civil authorities is likely a violation of the law. So in Florida, we're all considered mandatory reporters. You don't have to have proof. You just have to suspect it. So if you have any suspicion, by law, we're supposed to be turning in that information to the authorities.
Amen.
Okay. So,
Rebecca, I'm sorry.
yes.
I think that number 4 on that previous slide is such a critical one. A lot of times churches, they
Yes.
want to do their own internal investigation to determine the validity of the claim. Can you just speak to that for just a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So that does happen way more often than you would think, and a lot of times it's out of arrogance. They feel like they can handle it themselves. Unfortunately, when that happens, and I did skip over it just for the sake of time, because I'm out of time, I'm sorry, Mark.
That's all right.
But a lot of times, 9 out of 10 times, they'll respond with self-reliance, pride, self-righteousness, arrogance, and almost like a perfectionist disposition where they have to do this perfectly. But unfortunately, churches, because they've not been trained to do an investigation in this altitude, they botch it because they don't ask for help from the people who have been trained to do this. And so you're actually opening up yourself to a lawsuit. Your insurance company will most likely drop you, and then you'll have to go find another insurance company. So that's a huge liability. You guys started a church because you love the Lord and you want to teach everybody about the Lord. Don't handle things that you're not really, really good at. So I used to be a small business consultant, and I would sell insurance and stuff like that. And I'd say, you opened up a business because you're great at landscaping, not to run HR and payroll, right? You opened up a church because you want to teach everybody the good news of Jesus Christ, not have to do investigations. And so leave that to the professionals. Thanks for bringing that up, Mark. And do what you're best at, and that's shepherd the flock of Christ. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And would you suggest that when something is brought to the attention of the churches to go ahead and just make that call to law enforcement?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let them do
Call
their
law
job.
enforcement, but then serve the family of the victim, serve the survivor. serve the sexual predator, right? Share the gospel with this man or woman, because women are not above it either. Serve the church. Let the church know, hey, there's been a situation that's happened. We want to shepherd your heart in light of this. This is what we're doing to prevent it from happening again. Like, don't be afraid to talk about these things, because everybody is going to be needing to be served in a loving, humble way in light of abuse happening right under their nose, because they're going to have a lot of questions, right? Okay, so have I convinced you yet that you need a child protection program? Every church, every school, every camp needs one. Here's just a few more reasons that you need one. In order to satisfy insurance, your legal counsel. It'll help define roles and protect staff and volunteers. It creates an opportunity to talk about abuse. It will define clear guidelines for reporting and responding to abuse. It creates clear guidelines for how church should interact with sexual offenders. By the way, you can have sex offenders still join your church, but there has to be some sort of system. They should not be allowed to be around children. There can be a mentor system where remotely, like in a distance, someone is actually escorting them. And someone who has truly repented and came to Christ will understand. They will appreciate that accountability. If there's any pushback, there's another church down the street that they're welcome to visit.
But would we really want to send them to another church, though?
Well, you might want to give them
I'm
a
just
call.
being honest.
You might, well, do that brother and sister a favor and say, hey, this is what happened here, right? They want to serve. We know about their past. We told them that if they want to serve as an usher or whatever, or if they want to attend here, there's going to be a buddy system. There's a church in Frisco, Texas that does this, who's one of our accredited churches, named Providence Church in Frisco. They do this, and they had a guy on the Chris Hansen To Catch a Predator show. That guy still attends the church. He has to check in every time he gets to church, and somebody follows him around. They're really good friends at this point, but he has repented.
Yeah,
there's a big
right.
difference, right?
Right.
Someone who starts balking at your demands
That's what I'm
to
talking about.
protect, well, they have hidden motives. They absolutely have hidden motives. And if you tell them, hey, sorry, bud, but you're not welcome here unless you can abide by this, then if you know some friends in the area that are pastors, I would encourage you to give them a heads up. Because they're looking for easy prep. So we already mentioned Florida is a mandatory reporter state. No suspicion or no evidence is required. You just need to suspect that there's abuse. I forgot to advance the slide. And it's a third-degree felony if you're found out to have known about abuse or neglect and don't report it. And it's not just for children, it's for elderly also. Okay? I went 5 minutes over. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
But you're all probably wondering, okay, so she taught us a lot about grooming, the church, abuse, but what does she do? Great. So I work for Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. What we have done is we've raised the standard of care for children in Christian schools, churches, and camps. And so about 4 years ago, we created a standard of care for children in these facilities. We've had lawyers on both sides of the aisles get together with us, experts in child abuse in the industry, and we created 73 indicators, a set of standards, just like you would see from ACSI or is it IFCA, IFCA? Where they do a third-party audit of your finances or your processes and procedures for a school. We do that for your child's safety policy and procedures. So we do it in a few different ways. We will get you set up with our standards. We'll do an initial assessment to see where you're at, what you're doing, and where you have weak areas. And then we show you a report that says, okay, this is where you're weak. This is what we recommend, and then we give you time to implement those changes. Part of that is creating a child safety team to oversee the implementation of the child protection program. At the end, when you're like, we're confident, we're ready for our audit, we will do a virtual audit of all of your documentation, and then we'll come in person. So you'll have a third-party independent audit who's physically auditing your child protection processes, so that way you can verify to the community, to the parents, to the children, to the teens, that everything that's in writing you're physically doing. So a lot of other companies will go out, they'll do an initial audit, but then they don't follow up to make sure you're staying on top of it. So we'll do a virtual audit the year after that to make sure you're staying on top of it, and then another physical audit. So every 2 years you'll have a physical audit. This third-party audit is guaranteeing that you're doing the very best you can to protect the children. At the end of that, you get our seal of approval to say you've gone above and beyond. You'll go on our directory so that way parents can know where the safest places are for their kids. Now, we recently partnered with Florida Baptist Convention to give all churches in Florida an opportunity to join ECAP. If you are a church with membership of 500 or less, then you qualify for a scholarship through us and Florida Baptist. The membership fee to join ECAP is only $300. They will pay 50% of that, and if you couple that with the initial assessment I mentioned, we'll take another $50 off. So you, in essence, could have an initial assessment and your membership application fee for only $400. And then you're joining a whole community of churches, schools, camps, and ambassadors across the country who are taking child care seriously and trying to prevent abuse. It's a live forum that we have for topics that might be hard to discuss, or maybe there's situations that have occurred in your church and you want to know how to handle it. So you have a whole community of your peers that are walking through the same thing you are, and that can give you tips and advice. So we're trying to up the standard of child protection in this country by working with the salt and the light of the world, who should be taking this more seriously than everybody else. So that is my time here. Thank you so much. I'd like to open it up for questions.